Nearly half the units in every apartment building in America turn over every single year. And the system most operators used to manage it, whiteboards and phone calls. Today, I'm sitting down with Jonathan Kite, a guy who left Microsoft to fix this. And what he built is changing how the entire industry operates. Here's what most people outside this industry don't understand. Multifamily, it's a multi-trillion-dollar asset class. These aren't mom and pop landlords. These are institutional operators running tens of thousands of units, hundreds of thousands of units at times. And when someone moves out, the process to get that unit ready for the next resident, cleaning, painting, repairs, inspections, is still managed the way it was 20 years ago. No central system, no visibility, no accountability. And every day that unit sits empty, it's burning cash. Today, we're going to break down why the industry got stuck, what it took to build a real solution, and what changes from here. Before we get into the full conversation, here's something that will reframe how you think about terms. Jonathan told me that when his team studied this across markets, they found that most operators assume a vendor is a vendor, interchangeable commodity level. That assumption is the root of almost every term problem. The vendor isn't the commodity, the system is the commodity. And if you don't have one, you're paying the price on every single turn. Now let me bring in the person who figured this out. Jonathan Kite left Microsoft in Seattle, co-founded RentReady with Will Bro and Ryan McMillan, raised over $11 million and built integrations with Yardi, RealPage, and Entrada. So Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited for the conversation.
We're going to cover three things today. First, the chaos and why this process actually looks like without technology, and why a multi-trillion-dollar industry got stuck running it on whiteboards. Second, the build. Jonathan's story from Microsoft to Marketplace, the assumptions that were wrong and the decisions that shaped RentReady. Third, the future. What's breaking next in multifamily and where AI changes the physical layer of maintenance. Let's start with the mess. Throughout the United States, we're looking at about 50% of units being turned every year. In other words, for every two occupants, one of them moves out, right? So that's an incredible number when we're looking at 23 million apartments in a year existing throughout the United States, about 12 million turn, right? Give or take.
It's an outstanding number. I think people outside multifamily are always shocked to hear that number. You just take an average size apartment community, 200 units, 100 of those are going to turn every single year. It's a big number. It's a big problem to solve.
Walk me through what the process looked like before RentReady existed.
Sure. I think it's very manual. I think the best way to paint the picture for how turns were managed before RentReady is to think about how you manage service contractors in your day-to-day life on a personal basis. If you need to have an electrician in to put a new light fixture in your home, you've got to go through the process of finding that electrician. You may ask friends or neighbors. You may search online, find that electrician, make sure that they're good based off reviews or recommendations. Call them to schedule them to make sure that they have availability to fit your need when you need that done. Have the work done, confirm that the work meets your standard, and then wait for an invoice and hope that invoice comes on time. And that's just one instance of that. A turn typically has someone interacting with anywhere from kind of 4 to 5 different vendors. And again, we just talked about 50% of your units are turning. So this is happening hundreds of times. We're talking about 500, 600, 700 vendor interactions just like that every single year, and it's 100% offline. It's 100% tracked manually. And so people are using a dry erase board or a chalkboard to kind of track it. They draw out a very basic project matrix of unit numbers and services, and they're calling and texting and emailing and trying to map vendor availability dates to move-outs and move-ins, and doing that all without the assistance of tools that automate that entire process.
So you're telling me that the most critical part of a multi-trillion-dollar industry is run between notes on a post-it note, whiteboards, and phone calls?
100%. It's shocking to hear it because you're right. A down unit that isn't ready for a new resident to move in is lost revenue, and there's not a good process to do this until rent ready.
When did you found it, Rent Ready? When did you start?
Yeah, started in 2014, and at the time I was at Microsoft. I lived out in Seattle. Dream company to work for me. Had always been an ambition to be there and to build a career there. And so when I got the call from my two other co-founders, Will and Ryan, it was, I think, a dream come true.
So you and your co-founders met at UNC, right?
That's right, yeah.
Chapel Hill. And that wasn't really your typical college startup, right? You were at Microsoft, from Microsoft to like turning units in apartments. How did that transition happen, like, and why?
Yeah, not a normal transition by far. And so, yeah, all of us went to the University of North Carolina. I actually had the benefit of growing up with one of my co-founders, Will Brew. We've known each other since we were in middle school, and it was actually always our dream to start a company together. We didn't know that it would be in multifamily. We didn't know that it would be in turns, and that's kind of where the benefit of the third co-founder, Ryan McMillan, really came in, where he was from the multifamily industry, and he started, like most do, on site, and then worked his way up, and he really saw firsthand the challenges of the manual coordination of turns. And he is a very entrepreneurial person by nature, and thought, like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And he and Will started talking about it. And since Will knew that we always wanted to start a company together, Will has a business background, Ryan has a multifamily background. They needed somebody with a technical background to build Rent Ready, and so they gave me a call. For me, I think it was really the excitement of the opportunity to build your own company that really kind of pulled me away from Microsoft into the problem of trying to solve turns, which is actually a far more complicated problem than I think most would give it credit.
So do you remember that particular moment when the call came through, or was it a meeting, an in-person meeting, when you were asked to join?
Yeah. So first it was a call, and it was very innocent. It was kind of describing the problem at a very high level, which was, hey, what do you know about building scheduling software? I didn't know anything, quite frankly. And I said, like, I'm willing to learn. I'd love to learn how to do that. And they kind of described the problem to me over the phone, because they were in Charlotte and I was in Seattle, and we'd talk late at night for them and early evening for me. And the more they kept describing the problem, it was not about just scheduling. It was about managing kind of sequential and dependent workflows because it's a multi-service, multi-scheduling problem. And so it was just a tremendously interesting problem to try to solve, which then ultimately led to me coming to Charlotte multiple times to kind of meet with them, go and see firsthand kind of what it took to turn an apartment, which was really eye-opening, and I think made the problem statement even more difficult. For me, like, why I loved building software, why I loved working at Microsoft was I love tackling big problems, and the bigger and meatier the problem, the more interesting it is for me to want to try to solve.
From the incredible job that, a job at Microsoft is, to starting this from scratch, what made this prototype this appealing, this exciting to you, for you to make the switch? Because I can imagine it wasn't easy.
Yeah, definitely not an easy decision. I think for me, like, the pride of building your own thing is really exciting. And that's not to say that working on a team, working on a broader platform is not exciting. But when you work for a big technology company, you own a very small piece of a very large puzzle. And even within that small piece in a large puzzle, your piece within that is even smaller. It can sometimes be difficult to kind of track your day-to-day work to the impact that you're ultimately having. And when you're building your own product, the feedback is real time. And that real time feedback is addicting. Building something, seeing the impact that it has. And so for me, the process of creativity, of coming home every night, working on that problem, just became more invigorating, I think, and more rewarding on a day-to-day basis.
You described in a previous conversation we had your vision to me as building the Uber for apartment turns. You press a button, everything happens in a sequence. That sounds super clean, right? Well, what could go wrong.
Yeah.
So let's
Yeah.
talk about what could go wrong and what actually did go wrong.
Yeah, everything, honestly. And I think, yeah, while it was a naive founding vision, let's create the Uber for apartment turns, I think in many ways, like, it's still the right vision for what we're trying to build, which is software in and of itself, that is just software is all fine and well. But software that actually facilitates real world outcomes, physical outcomes, like turning a unit or ordering a cab, as an example, to me, that's like very magical. And that was really what we set out to build, was something as simple as press one button, have a unit turned. And you can see how that would be an easy sell if it was truly that seamless. And I think for us, like, one of the early mistakes that we made was this assumption that all service contractors that provide turn services are kind of equal, right? That a person who is great at painting in an apartment down the road is going to be great at painting apartments everywhere.
Are you
throughout the city.
describing a commodity here? Kind of like you're thinking along those terms?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Just like, sure, Uber drivers have ratings, but in general, like, an Uber driver is an Uber driver. You
Yeah, it's
order a
kind of
cab.
like plug and play, replaceable type of, like, with another Uber driver that has the same expected behavior and like things are smooth.
100%. Yeah, it's that consistent experience you expect when you order an Uber. We kind of had that same assumption, right? That painting an apartment is painting an apartment. Should be pretty straightforward and pretty simple. Could not have been more wrong about that. And I think what we underappreciated was the level of relationship that is built between the people who are on site at these apartment communities, the maintenance techs, maintenance managers, community managers, leasing agents, and the service vendors that they select. They build meaningful relationships. They follow one another as their careers take them to different management companies or upwards in an organization. And I think that was something that we underappreciated in the vision of creating the Uber for apartment turns.
So we already determined that the assumption of looking at your vendors as commodity was wrong. How did that realization change your product?
It changed it dramatically. Initially, we really focused on kind of schedule optimization, right? Making sure that vendors had as full a schedule as they wanted, and that we were optimizing for things like routes and hours in the day. And I think that while those all have positive attributes and are still important parts of our platform, what we fundamentally missed, again, was giving communities the ability to select and build a permanent relationship with the vendor. And so for us, what that means is, in version 1 of the product, customers didn't get to choose which vendors performed work. We kind of made that selection process for them. And in today's world, there's a very complicated kind of favoriting system where a community manager can go in and heart or favorite a particular painter or cleaner that they love. And then that allows our scheduling algorithms to make sure that that favorited person or that relationship gets formed long term, so that all paints follow the same pattern of sticking with that painter or sticking with that cleaner. That's kind of iteration 1. And now we're working on a second iteration of that, which is allowing vendors that they may have had relationships with before Rent Ready to join Rent Ready and continue to service their communities as well. And so that's a really important thing for us in our product that we're really proud of having put in place.
Other companies have tried to solve this problem before Rent Ready. Where did they fail?
Yeah, I think we view this as being very much a software solved problem, and one that can be solved centrally. And I think that a lot of people have tried to kind of decentralize solving this problem, whether that is having local kind of quality assurance managers or localized recruiters or localized sales, or even localized operations where you have a representative from a turn company going on site to solicit and take orders for turns. And so for us, that one is not fast enough. This industry needs to move faster. Turn time, as we just kind of talked about, is critical to asset performance. And so the technology piece of that is critical in terms of being able to accelerate turns through things like integrations and through digital workflows in the product. But then I think also centralized support is also important. Being able to get real-time answers to problems, having teams that are operationally focused on viewing turn boards and turn schedules and vendor reliability across an entire market for entire management companies centrally helps us make better decisions and optimize for the right outcomes to deliver higher quality turns, faster turns in a more reliable manner for our customers. And I think when you try to do that locally, sometimes you can't see that full picture and you just don't deliver the results that ultimately this industry needs.
I want to pick up on the full picture part. Why might be that, if you're like rider on the ground, you might be missing out? What are the reasons?
Yeah, I think that if you're not looking at the data at large, and the way that we kind of have talked about this internally is that our job is to really be an executive assistant to a maintenance manager or an executive assistant to a community manager where we're checking the turn board because we know where vendors are within the city. We know if they have two jobs, where they are in job one, how much time they have left on job one, how long it typically takes them to complete a job. We also know that we have vendor 234 available with additional bandwidth to backfill in the event that a vendor has an emergency, a flat tire, a sick child, can't show up on time. And so I think being able to zoom out and look at that problem from the perspective of data across a market, across a management company, allows for more critical decisions to be made in a more timely fashion than when you're kind of living a mobile lifestyle on a golf cart going from building to building in a garden style type community, and you don't have access to these tools to be able to make these types of decisions.
If you were to describe the core dysfunction in multifamily in one sentence, what would that sentence be?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of decentralized decision-making processes. And again, we kind of, not to beat a dead horse, but we just kind of talked about how underinvested and underdeveloped technology in the maintenance side, and particularly in the vertical of turns, have been has been historically for multifamily. It's one of the most critical operational processes that happens to get a unit ready for a new resident to move in. And the procurement decisions around the vendors that perform this work are not managed centrally. That's a decentralized decision. It's a market level decision. The workflows that run those are completely offline. Even in kind of digital solutions, like they're not directly communicating in real time with vendors. They're not doing real time vendor availability assessments, real time pricing assessments, real time reliability assessments. And to me, that's a huge dysfunction to not invest the appropriate tooling around one of the most critical operational processes that exists in multifamily.
Okay, so the Uber for turns thesis was wrong. The vendor as commodity assumption was wrong. And every company that tried this before failed. So what does it actually take to make a marketplace work when the product is physical labor inside a vacant apartment? That's where this gets really interesting, because what Jonathan built next broke a lot of assumption about what technology can and can't control. When scaling, when volume increases, more turns, more vendors, more markets to serve, what breaks first?
Yeah, I think my answer may surprise you. It's somewhat counterintuitive, but we actually believe that the higher the volume, the better the outcome. And I think that's largely because higher levels of volume in turns means better data. That's more data around how contractors are going to perform from a quality perspective, a reliability perspective. It's more volume in terms of predicting and understanding rates of reschedule on the customer side. It gives you more pieces to move around as well. And so if you have more vendors working to serve more turns, you have more optionality in order to optimize for the outcomes that customers want. And so more data, more volume, more turns, ultimately, I think leads to a better delivery for our customers. And so we actually embrace that volume, which I know is kind of a surprising answer.
Yeah, I make a parallel with back in the day when I used to be on site, and I used to tell everyone I'd rather manage a 800 unit property than a 200 unit. And everybody's like, why would you want like so much trouble? For me, it's not trouble. It's like the resources that you have available. At 800 unit, maybe you have like 8 employees. 200 unit, you might have one or two. One person calls us sick out of like 8 employees, you still have 7 left. So you only lost like 15% of your workforce, around that, 12.5%. And then when you work with, one other employee and that employee calls in sick, half of your workforce is gone. So
That's
like
right.
that's the way I look at it, right? What type of resources you could have available. And then you're looking at worst case scenario. Someone is out of the picture, like what do you do with the remaining, right? And how much can you handle?
It's all about eliminating single points of failure. And to piggyback off the last statement of kind of the biggest shock in multifamily is if you're relying solely on the local decision making of procuring local mom and pop vendors, you kind of have created this single point of failure with that one vendor. And so why wouldn't you want to expose yourself to a platform that has a marketplace of vendors that are available to eliminate single points of failure? I think you're exactly right.
Let's talk about things that go wrong, right?
Okay.
And if you're in multifamily, what can go wrong in multifamily? How about everything? What does a bad turn look like behind the scenes?
Let's see. I think it always starts at the beginning of the turn. And I think that one of the things that always surprises us is kind of two core things around the initiation of a turn, which usually set it up for failure, which are it wasn't ordered in a timely fashion. So what that usually means in our world is that the request to start a turn and the request to schedule service vendors for a turn happens after a resident move out. You've already made a mistake at that point, right? One, you've added time to your turn artificially. There's no reason to do that if you wait until after the resident moves out. And two, you're less likely to have that vendor be available when you need them. And so you may delay the start, or you may have to use a vendor that you're not familiar with. And so waiting to get a turn started is usually step one in terms of a turn going poorly. And the second is not really knowing what scope of work is needed for a turn. Not putting eyes on a unit before you actually talk to the vendor that's going to do the work. And so making sure that that vendor is fully prepared in terms of knowing the materials that might be needed. So if you didn't walk a unit and there's a hole in the wall, it's usually better for the vendor to come with the sheetrock already, right? Instead of having to come, see it, go back to Lowe's, pick up the sheetrock. Like you want that vendor to be there on time the first day available to perform work with the materials that they need to do a good job and understand what type of crews to send, how many people to send to make sure that that job gets done in a timely fashion so that you can move a resident in on time. And so for me, a turn going poorly usually starts with how it's ordered, when it's ordered.
Now, quality, it's in the eye of the beholder, right? So it could be very subjective. It is, especially in our space. I want to ask you, how do you ensure vendor quality without actually ruining your margins?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like quality is 100% subjective. And I think that there's really two ways that we primarily focus on that. One, our belief is that the folks on site are ultimately the purveyors of what is good and what is not good. They're the ones paying for the work. They're the ones who are moving residents in. They're the ones who are responsible for the product that their customers ultimately pay for. And so we deeply respect the feedback that our customers provide us on service providers. And we've built a lot of ways to provide that feedback into our products. And that really looks kind of, as you would expect, like a review system. Like just like on Amazon, when you're looking at a potential product to purchase, you see user reviews on a star rating basis, but also feedback and comments. And so we expose all of that data around all service providers on our marketplace to customers so that they understand what other customers say about these vendors, what their reliability is. And so I think that's super helpful in terms of driving a feedback loop. That's very critical. But we like to take it a step further as well. And so one of the things that I think is challenging and the one area that does potentially break with volume is humans can only physically go walk and evaluate quality in so many units in a market in a day. And the bigger the city, the harder that is, right? And so if you're doing hundreds of paints in a single city in a day, it's very difficult to actually get eyes on 100 unless you use technology. And so that's an area where we've developed a process that allows a centralized rent-ready team that's focused on quality to engage in peer-to-peer videos calls with service providers in our marketplace when they have finished work to perform a quality assessment. And so they will have the service provider hold up their phone, use the rear-facing camera on their phone live, and walk through a unit. We've got detailed notes around what our customers expect at a property level. Like this maintenance manager is very specific about peeling back the seals in a fridge to ensure that those are 100% clean. And so we have those notes available, and then our team will guide that service provider through that process. And I think that helps us help service providers put their best foot forward. And that's kind of how we position it. It's not us checking and making sure that you're doing good work. It's us helping coach service providers to meet the expectation that site teams have, because site teams are the ones who really decide what is good and bad.
Video inspections are brilliant, and I think with the AI advancement, they're becoming better and better, exponentially better, I should say. But where does human judgment still win over technology?
Yeah, I think again the leasing agent who's doing that final walkthrough, who's doing the sparkle clean at the very end before a resident moves in, like he or she knows, right? Like that in-person element of a customer's response to the condition of a unit, that emotional response. These are people's homes that are being moved into. And, I think that we would never want to discount the fact that the people on the ground who are managing these communities are the ones who kind of have that emotional response of evaluating what is good and bad. And we want to make sure that we always are delivering to that expectation.
What do operators consistently blame vendors for? That it's actually their fault?
Great question. Everything. I think I'd piggyback a little bit off kind of my first answer around when a turn goes poorly, why does it go poorly? And again, I think it's preparedness. It's preparedness to get a unit ready to work in. And so when a unit takes longer than expected, oftentimes it's because the service provider doesn't know what work is needed. And it could be ordered as, hey, it's just a normal paint. I just pop in on Tuesday and get it done. And you walk in there and there's 4 or 5 holes in the wall, and it's a smoker's unit, and there are stains all over the ceiling and stickers all over the wall from a child. And then, they're upset when it can't be done in a day. And so I think that, again, like making sure that there are tools in place that allow customers to kind of pre-walk and inspect units, align those with scope in the way that a vendor thinks about scope, so that vendor has photo documentation before they're walking into a unit of what to expect. They know how long it's going to take. That just helps keep turns on track. And then same thing on the ordering, right? If a customer is not ordering a unit until after a resident moves out, that just adds a lot of stress, right? All of a sudden you've got vendors working on top of vendors, 2, 3 vendors servicing a unit in the same day. And that just leads to usually poor quality and a poor outcome. And so making sure that it's ordered ahead of time is critical. That's why we have built integrations with platforms like Yardi and RealPage and Entrada to take a notice to vacate to get vendors scheduled as soon as you get a notice to not renew. So we're scheduling vendors out 30 days in advance, which solves for that problem. And so we try to help operators kind of get out of those bad habits to improve the turn.
Do you find a disconnect between the quality that your customers expect and the price that they're willing to pay?
I think absolutely. I think that, and there are a couple of counterintuitive things too, in terms of, I think that people think about price on an asset class level as well, thinking that a lower asset class community, kind of like in the traditional built in the 70s, kind of garden style C class community should be less expensive to turn than kind of a higher class, like A high-rise type community. And I think that that's just not true, right? It's all about the need relative to kind of the wear and tear that's in that unit. And so counterintuitively, like the older units are more expensive to turn, right? So I think like there's that element, which I think is always kind of interesting to peel the layers back on that. But then I think the other is like it's obviously a very cost control focused environment right now. Margins are obviously much thinner in multifamily, and so expense management is critical across the board. And I do think there's somewhat of a misalignment in terms of kind of the expected output of what is this needs to be done in less than a day, sometimes less than 4 or 5 hours, and the price point that kind of the industry has set as the standard for work that's been delivered. And so we ultimately believe in giving customers choice. Customers should be able to choose resources based off quality versus price point versus reliability. And we don't want to make that decision on behalf of customers. And so we want to make sure that they're exposed to a wide range of those options in the marketplace so that they can figure out and align kind of that procurement decision that they're making in our platform.
If you're running turns right now and hearing this thinking, that's exactly what happens at my properties. I put together a free checklist called the Zero Vacancy Gap Playbook. It covers the KPIs, the blind spots, and the benchmarks Jonathan is describing. Link below. But keep listening because the fundraising section is where the founder lessons really hit. You raised money twice, $1.5 million in 2018 and then 10 million in 2021. Tell me about one thing that's the most and consistently misunderstood by your investors about the multifamily terms.
I think the unit economics certainly are a big part of it, margin, and that's kind of what you were alluding to with the quality piece as well. In many cases, you would talk to an investor, and I think that they would be very surprised at kind of the total price point of a turn relative to what their expectation was. And that expectation may have been biased or influenced by exposure to SFR and kind of the price points of turns in SFR or commercial spaces. And so I think like the total kind of value of a turn often surprised them. And then I think they also were very underappreciative of kind of the nature of how multifamily is constructed, how you sell into multifamily in terms of kind of the different segmentation across fully integrated operators versus third-party managers versus asset managers, and like really thinking through go-to-market in an industry that is very decentralized and highly segmented like that.
What investor question forced you to rethink your entire model, if there was one?
Yeah, I think you always get great questions from investors and from board members. Up until Series A, we really built the business brick by brick. And so that means that we recruited one service contractor at a time onto the platform, and we sold a single property at a time, one community by one community. And so it was a very slow kind of brick building process. And I think the questions were really around like, how do you scale this faster? How do you gain leverage in your go-to-market motion to really kind of up level to a more enterprise-oriented game, right? And can you sell this top down? And, fast forward to today, 6 years later, that is what we're doing. But it does fundamentally change kind of the way that you think about expanding into new markets. Because if you're going to sell top down, you can't just be in 2 or 3 markets in the Southeast. You need to be nationally relevant to the person that you're talking to. And every management company has, different distribution in the different markets that exist in the United States, where, your relevancy to that person is really dependent on where you are. And so I think that was a great question in terms of how are you going to scale kind of growth in the business to really thinking about, well, what does that mean in terms of how we sell, who we sell to, where we launch service markets, and how we use technology to accelerate that process.
What was the one situation or thing that almost killed the round for you?
Yeah, I think that's a tough question. And I'd love to hear, what Will has to say about that. One, I think we raised capital during a very difficult time during the pandemic. And so it was hard to meet face to face. And so I think that made it very difficult. I don't think it boiled down to like a single question or interaction that almost killed the deal or anything like that. I think it was just a difficult time to raise money and a difficult environment to raise money that ultimately just made it a super hard process for us.
You started a business in Charlotte. What worked in Charlotte that actually broke when you expanded to the second market?
Yeah, I think everything. And I think it was a forcing function for us. When we first expanded, I think we really viewed it as, well, everything we did in Charlotte, we need to copy and paste in that second market or that third market. So if we have a salesperson in Charlotte, we need a salesperson in a new market. If we have a quality control person in Charlotte, we need a quality control person in a new market, a new recruiter and a new operations person and so I think we viewed it very much as copy the template in Charlotte, paste it in another market. And I don't think we had really learned the value of centralization of our own internal operations and our own internal functions yet in terms of supporting other markets. And, like when your home market is in your home city, you're afforded the liberty to do things you can't do remotely. If a customer has an issue, you can physically drive to that apartment community and apologize. When we were a young company and we just started it, we also, if we had a service issue or a service reliability issue, it was not uncommon for Will or Ryan or myself to actually go do the work ourselves, to take a paint sprayer that we had in the office and go paint the unit or go clean the unit. And so you can't do that if the market you're serving is 200, 300 miles away. And so I think we had to learn to build better business process and centralize functions in a way that allowed us to then scale more efficiently. In short, everything broke, but all of those were forcing functions to build a better and stronger company.
Tell me about those situations where you had to grab a, spray paint and, just kind of do the work. What did that teach you, that experience?
Humility. Humility first and foremost. I think there's less and less respect, I think, for blue collar workers. And like, we try to teach our employees and build a culture at Rent Ready which instills the lesson that we don't have a company without the service providers in our marketplace. We just don't. And they're the ones doing the hard work. We're not doing the hard work. They're doing the hard work. And so a classic story that we like to tell every new employee, which I'll share with you now, is kind of in the first year or two of founding the company, we landed a customer that doubled our business. And Will and I were both building the platform, running operations, and we had a cleaner call out. And that was a Friday. The resident was going to move in on a Saturday. We tried everything we could to find a backup cleaner. We couldn't find one. And by lunchtime, we realized like the buck stops with us. We're just going to have to go clean that unit. So we went home, got cleaning supplies, drove out to that community, walked into the unit, and it was a unit that a resident had lived in for 10 years. Which, as you know, is a little different than a 1 year turn, 2 year turn. It did not take us long to realize that household cleaners weren't going to cut it. Interestingly, a huge snowstorm was rolling into Charlotte. Will, my co-founder's wife, was 9 months pregnant, so she was freaking out, like, why aren't you home? And I think it took the two of us 8 hours to clean that apartment. And I think we were early 30s. Pretty fit guys, like in a full sweat, in there for 8 hours. And it was just the most humbling experience. And for us, I think it taught us humility in terms of like, we have cleaners on our platform who can do 3 of those a day. And it took 2 of us 8 hours and we could barely get through 1. And so I think it just builds an extreme level of appreciation. And culturally for us, like that has disseminated into kind of how we think about decision making all the way down to the product level. And so we spend half of our time from a product and engineering perspective building tools for vendors, because our belief is that if the vendors aren't well served and if the vendors aren't happy, then our customers aren't happy, because again, they're the ones doing the work. In the Uber analogy, they're the drivers, right? And so you've got to treat the drivers right. We want to try to treat our service professionals on our platform the best that we can.
Jonathan, the chicken and the egg problem. You start in a new market and you have 0 vendors to serve the market and you have 0 customers. How do you solve for that?
Yeah, cold start problems are hard. We have tried a lot of different things to do that. In the old Rent Ready world, it was really around kind of getting pre-commitments on both sides, right? So can you get a customer to kind of pre-commit to a service go live date? Can you get service contractors to commit to a pre-go live date? One of the big changes that we've made in our platform to truly solve this problem moving forward is letting customers bring their own vendors into RentRedi and use RentRedi's tools and technology with their existing vendor base. That accomplishes a lot of things. One, it kind of eliminates the cold start problem because they've got vendors right out the gate and they're comfortable with those vendors and they know them well. And two, it just removes a lot of friction and kind of simplifies the change management process. You're not replacing a workflow platform and vendors. You're just replacing a workflow platform, but you're keeping your vendors. And so that really helps simplify that change management process and eliminates that cold start problem in a way that in the past, I think to your point, it was very difficult to align both customer demand and service contractor supply at the same time. And while we got better at it, we never perfectly solved that. And so I think this is a very kind of graceful way to kind of accommodate two great things for our customers and for service providers moving forward.
What's your onboarding time typically if I'm a new client? A new property in, first of all, a new property in an existing market. Let's just say that I'm a new property in a new market. What's the difference? Is there any difference? What was the turnaround time?
Yeah,
I think up and running?
It depends on a couple of factors. I think one, the maturity of the market, to your point. So if it's an existing market and it's a highly mature market, for us, that would be a market like Charlotte or Atlanta or Raleigh, where we have an abundance of service providers that other customers have brought on or that we have found. It's a much quicker process. One of the things that, again, we try to instill is that customers bring their own vendors. And so typically the delay is how quickly can site teams help facilitate us as a company, RentRedi, getting in touch with the vendors they already use to collect the information we need to onboard them on the platform. But the short answer is it can be as short as 2 weeks in a more mature market or as long as 6 to 8 weeks in a new market scenario. Generally, we can move faster than our customers can. It's really about making sure that we don't rush things through without making sure that we've built the right relationships with the vendors that they want to bring on, that we've collected the right level of information, and that we've set up those communities and that management company for success with training, tools, integrations, etc. So short as 2 weeks, as long as 6 to 8. We can go fast, we can go slow. We try to map and do what's right for that customer in that situation.
You have integrations with most major PMSs. What did automation help with, and what did it expose?
Yeah. I think number one, it eliminates human error. And so what we typically see is for a non-integrated customer, turns are getting scheduled, not started, but scheduled 5 days after move out. Just let that sink in, right? That's almost a point of occupancy when you really kind of reverse engineer the math behind that of delay because they just didn't schedule it before the resident moved out. And so it eliminates that completely because it is scheduling units as soon as they go on notice. And that, I think, that just helps dramatically. Like we see that cut 5-6 days of turn time like that. And so that's, I think, a very powerful piece of the integration. The part of it that it's going to expose is kind of on-site operations and preparedness. So just because it automatically fires off a schedule and coordinates with service vendors automatically, did you do a pre-walk or a post-resident move-out inspection? Did you confirm that utilities would be on? And if you don't do those things and you just rely on the magic of it automatically scheduling, all of those flaws are going to be exposed, right? And so it doesn't excuse you from doing the right things from a process perspective. And if you don't do the right things from a process perspective, what it's going to do is actually cause some issues. Now, I think that's a positive, right? I think exposing those types of issues, while maybe painful for a month, helps bring to light improvements that we can suggest and consult with whoever we're working with at that management company to improve. And so that might be like, hey, we've got this great digital inspection tool that you can do before the turn starts that aligns with vendor scope. ensures vendors get that scope, and that prevents kind of these problems from happening, right? And so I think it's going to expose some things, but it's those things that it exposes, I think, are actually going to drive operational improvement for a portfolio.
Increases accountability too, because with visibility it comes accountability.
100%. If you don't measure it, you can't improve it.
That's exactly, yeah, that's the famous quote. One decision, if you had one decision that you would automate today, what would that be for an operator?
For me, I think, take a step back around the pre-rent ready world, right? And we kind of talked about our initial founding assumption that service providers could be treated like commodity resources. That's not true, right? Relationships matter. However, portfolios have goals and metrics that they need to hit, particularly around turn time. And so while the delay in getting a unit scheduled is one part of delay in turn time, another that we observe is site teams waiting for vendors they have a relationship with to be available. So if I like Joe the painter and I call Joe and I say, Joe, are you available next Thursday? And he said, nope, I'm not free till Monday. And you say, okay, let's book you Monday. You've just added time to that turn. And if I could automate one decision, it would be that decision, which is not letting site teams make that call every single time. I think that should be something that a portfolio operator decides as kind of a operating process or standard for their portfolio. And that could be, look, if there's no move-in, fine, wait for Joe. But if there is a move-in, you don't wait for Joe. You use Bob or you use Sue, you use the next painter in the line to get that paint scheduled when it needs to happen so that we can make sure we're moving residents on time. Delaying a turn and delaying a move-in because you've got a relationship with a painter who's not available, that's not acceptable in terms of kind of financial and fiduciary responsibility. Like, you need to get that unit turned.
Jonathan, what feels lonely about running a marketplace business?
Lonely. I would say anytime you're a middleman, it can be difficult, right?
Because you get hit from both sides, I assume.
We get hit from both sides.
You're about to say,
yeah,
right?
Get hit from both sides. Look, our goal is to try to add value to both sides of the equation. We want to add value through automation and tools and technology to customers. Same thing is true on the vendor side. We often become the arbiters of conflict, though. And so if the two sides don't agree, oftentimes, despite the fact that we're trying to optimize outcomes on both sides of the coin, we get blamed. And so that kind of puts you in a tough spot. And it can feel lonely at times when you kind of think about having to be the mediator in all conflict. And I think, as you know, like, there's always conflict. Like, it's a people business, it's a people industry. There's going to be conflict.
100%. When did you doubt that this is going to work?
I doubt it every day. I think any entrepreneur who doesn't have some degree of dissatisfaction in what they have done and what they have yet to do, not approaching it the right way. And I think that you have to have a constant sense of doubt to push yourself forward and to constantly improve. And if you don't, I don't know how they do it. I would love to know how they don't have doubt, but I think that it's healthy and it's healthy to carry a level of dissatisfaction perpetually because that's how you drive self-improvement and improvement in your business.
I love it. What leadership mistake cost you the most?
Yeah, I think for me, it's hiring. And look, I've read a million books about it. I've sought kind of mentorship around this. My personal opinion is that I think anybody who tells you that they're great at interviewing is probably overinflating their abilities, because I think interviewing is hard. Hiring is hard. And I think that that's not to say that I have not hired great people. Of course, I have hired great teammates. But I think that maintaining a very high batting average on great hires all the time is tremendously difficult. You have such a short period of time getting to know someone during a recruiting process, and it can be very difficult to really be excellent at that. And I think one of the things that people don't tell you when you found a company is half of your time is spent recruiting. It's just not something you think about, but you're constantly thinking about how do you bring more talent into your company? How do you push your team forward? And so I think not being great at hiring or not finding a way to bring somebody in who is great at hiring is a leadership mistake I've made, and one that I'm constantly trying to improve upon.
I love the approach. I keep telling people recruitment is not an event. It's a process. It's an ongoing process. It never ends in a healthy organization.
That's right.
What are people romanticizing about being a startup founder that you know is false?
Yeah. Well, I think Hollywood and television certainly paint a picture of it being, fun, carefree. You're your own boss. We were talking about this at lunch today.
Yeah.
I think they don't tell you that when you are your own boss and you control your own destiny, you work 10 times harder. That's not a bad thing, but I think that that's something that gets glossed over by Hollywood and television. And I just think that there is an under representation of the level of stress and the difficulty of decision making that you have to go through when you start a business or when you operate your own business as you do. Like, the day to day can be hard, and you're making hundreds, if not thousands, of decisions in real time, and there's no one there to help you do that. And so I think that they don't tell that side of the story, I think.
If a founder comes to you and says, I need to raise $10 million, just like you did recently, what should I know? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think that, and this is kind of agnostic of raising capital, but I think becomes even more true if you are successful in raising capital, is that whatever you raise, whatever business thesis, business model you have raised money under is fundamentally going to change in the next 3 years. Everything changes quickly. I think most successful companies go through anywhere from 2 to 3 major pivots in kind of business strategy and business model. And when you're a young company, those come fast and furiously. And so I think my advice to them would be, don't be stubborn. Be open to change. Change is a constant. Change will happen whether you like it or not. Either, if you can't get out of it, get into it and understand and embrace that and realize that the company that you're raising money for today is going to look totally different in 2, 3, 4 years.
How do you mitigate that with the investors? Because, the pitch that is today versus the company that becomes 5 years from now, changes. How do you manage that expectation?
I think communication is key. Relationships are key. Making sure, and for us in our particular case, many of our investors are well connected into multifamily. And so we actually get a ton of advice and or push or pull to make many of these changes based off the influence of our investors who are connected into multifamily. And that may not be true for all startup founders and all investors. But I think ultimately, there is a bit of a dichotomy in terms of an investor versus an operator. Like, the operator, they live with this every day. Like, it's all they are focused on. And so they have to make the hard decisions all the time. The investor, they get to walk away to a certain extent. And so I think that there is somewhat of there's kind of this classic chicken and pig breakfast story that's often told in software development when describing kind of Scrum and Agile development practice, which is the concept of a chicken and a pig talking about opening a breakfast restaurant. The pig basically says, I don't want to do that because I would have skin in the game and you wouldn't, in terms of serving bacon and eggs. And so I think that analogy is somewhat apt in terms of founders have a lot of skin in the game. This is what they live, breathe every single day. And so sometimes they have to kind of make those decisions to do what is best to keep the company moving forward, despite what an investor initially invested for. They're the ones who have the knowledge. They're there real time. They've got to make those tough decisions because they're the ones with skin in the game.
Jonathan, what do you see breaking in multifamily in operations in the next 5 years?
Yeah. I think there's going to be a massive labor and people problem. I think that we saw that, and nobody wants to blame COVID, but I think it's kind of been a very defining moment in all of our lives, and it's kind of everyone analyzes things now as a pre-COVID, post-COVID world. But I think in the post-COVID world, the labor shortage has only gotten worse. It's only gotten more pronounced. It's caused costs to skyrocket, both on kind of the maintenance tech and maintenance manager side from a employment perspective, but also on a vendor side and the cost of services. And I think younger folks don't want to get into this industry. And that's a problem. And I don't have a solution for that problem, but I think that it's very difficult for multifamily operators to recruit people into this industry, particularly on the maintenance side. And I think I think multifamily is responding admirably, thinking about using technology, using centralization strategies, but I don't think it'll be enough. And so I think there's going to be a big reckoning in terms of labor and in this industry in the next 10 years.
What part of the turnover process will be unrecognizable in 10 years from now?
But my theory is that the inspection piece is going to be the most unrecognizable. And so I think that every operator would tell you they have a standard operating process around inspections. I think the reality is inspections don't always happen. I think if anyone is being honest in this industry, they would be shaking their head silently as they listen to this and say, yep, that's right. But they need to happen, right? And so I think that the nature in which inspections occur, and that's like both the technology that drives it, but also who performs or conducts it, is going to change radically. Like it could be video and AI analyzed driven with a resident actually performing that video capture. It could be third party outsourced. Like it's going to change fundamentally. I think in the next 10 years, that to me is the biggest area of change.
How do you think that AI is changing the physical layer of maintenance?
Yeah, I wish there are some really smart people and great companies doing really cool things with AI, particularly around kind of asset and inventory management through kind of smart devices and IoT devices that use AI algorithms to analyze and detect potential failures in things like electrical wiring or in HVAC systems or in plumbing that are just super cool. And if you're into AI and you're into technology, as I am, and I know you are, like learning about those companies is just fascinating. And so I think that from a physical layer perspective, it's all about small, cheap IoT devices plugged into networks that allow AI to drive smarter decision making around proactive maintenance and replacement. I think that's going to save millions, if not billions of dollars in this industry over the next decade.
Jonathan, it's been great having you on today. In closing, I want you to share some contact information. Where can people find you, and how can they learn more about Rent Ready?
Yeah, so I'm not a big social media guy, but I am on LinkedIn, and so LinkedIn is probably the best place to follow me, as is our website. We've got a lot of content, news articles, other podcasts that we've been on and talked about what we're doing in the multifamily industry. So rentready.com, LinkedIn, both great places to learn more.
It was great having you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So let's recap. First, the chaos. A multi-trillion-dollar industry running its most critical recurring process on whiteboards and phone calls, and losing money on every single turn because of it. Second, the build. Jonathan left Microsoft, discovered that every assumption about vendors being interchangeable was wrong, and build a marketplace that actually works in a physical world. Third, the future. AI is coming for maintenance operations, and the operators who systemize now are the ones who will be standing in 5 years. If you got value from this, subscribe. If you want the free checklist, the Zero Vacancy Gap Playbook, the link is in the description below. And if you want to see my conversation with Will Bro on the turn economics and scaling side of this exact problem, I put it right here. See you in the next one.